and welcome to episode 5 of Cause and Effect. Thank you for joining me. Today, I want to talk to you about your organization's culture and specifically the expectations it places on you and your staff. So often, I hear from those working in the sector that they feel they have to give their all, that they always have to be available, and that their organization almost expects them to give their all. The thing is, though, most organizations don't set out to create that culture. They talk about valuing their staff and they promote their well-being. Nobody is saying we expect you to sacrifice your evenings, your weekends, and your sense of who you are outside of this work. But many organizations have created exactly this culture, but that happens gradually and unintentionally and with the very best of intentions typically. But the problem is it's costing the organization more than they realize. And this can be really hard to spot because it doesn't look like teams being exploited. It looks like teams and individuals who really believe in the mission and who are committed to it. It looks like staff doing their absolute best to make a difference in the world, and that commitment is celebrated. People who go the extra mile are praised, people who are available are seen as dedicated, and long hours are worn as a badge of honor. And the mission they all have creates a shared sense of purpose, and that's really energizing. And the camaraderie that comes from working towards something that matters is one of the best things about the sector. But somewhere along the way, that culture of purpose can tip into something which is less healthy. The work stops being something people do and it starts being something that people are. It starts to feel like you don't just work for the charity, you are the charity. And when work becomes who you are, it becomes very difficult to protect anything for yourself. And the trouble is knowing where that fine line between commitment and over identification isn't easy. But we all know it's there. And research has shown that up to 70% of charity leaders have become more concerned about burnout in their staff. And 66% say they're concerned about recruitment and retention. And that's got worse. And these two figures aren't just a coincidence. These things are so interconnected. When we have a culture that asks too much of its people, it leaves them feeling overwhelmed, making them feel less effective in their work. It leads to poor decision making, and this creates a cycle of firefighting, which means staff overwork, struggle to switch off, and the guilt they feel means there's no escape from work. They are their work. And this becomes the perfect storm for burnout, which results in these retention and recruitment issues. And so I think it's important for us to think about why this happens. And I think this starts with the sector's greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. When we feel like our work is a calling, when it is tied to our sense of meaning and purpose and who we are as individuals, it's easy for us to give more than is sustainable. And this often starts because we really enjoy the work. We have a huge sense of achievement from it. We're energized by it. We're excited by it. But over time, the work can start to feel more important than we are. And they start to make choices which put work first. And that sense of mission is one of the third sector's most powerful qualities. But without intentional leadership within the organization, it becomes a huge risk because staff watch how leaders work and we absorb it as the norm. You see dedication modeled from the top, and our staff replicate that. The culture becomes self reinforcing. And so we have new starters walking into organizations where this is simply how things are done and they'll follow suit. If you think back to your earliest roles in the sector, I bet you can see those leaders who worked in that way and how you started doing the same thing. But we also need to think about the organization's values and the language around those, and how that might be sending messages that are unintentional to our staff. This is something that could actually feel quite uncomfortable because the intention behind our values is always really, really good. But I've worked with charities who have values along the lines of going the extra mile. And the senior leadership team really understood that to mean that as an organization, they were committed to the people they served. They never gave up on clients, however complex the situation. They'd often support people who other organizations wouldn't work with. And it was really an expression of their dedication to their mission, but something had got lost in translation. And the majority of the workforce understood it to mean something very different. To them, it meant staying late. It meant taking on extra tasks. It meant that they couldn't say no. It meant that they felt they had to push through illness to get the job done. And so we can see how there was a really admirable intention behind this value, but it got lost and it created an unhealthy workplace culture in the process. So it's worth asking what your values, your language, and your leadership behaviors actually communicate to your teams, not what you intend for them to communicate, but what your staff actually hear and experience and believe is expected of them. And we also need to think about how a culture of presenteeism is unintentionally set from the top. Think about the signals you send day to day. When you email at the weekend, when you praise someone who stayed late to get the report finished, when you say it's okay to call you because you're not doing anything important with your day off. All these gestures come from a place of care and commitment. You want to help your team out, but they send a message that being available equals being a good worker and a good leader in the sector, and that the work comes first, that you shouldn't need time to switch off, that the right thing to do is always give more and to always offer. And your teams see all of it. So, if we're thinking about how we change a culture like this, well, of course, it takes time, um, but it's not impossible to do. But it starts with being really honest about where you are currently and taking responsibility for how you and the rest of your leadership team work, and how that maintains a culture that's perhaps not always the healthiest. And so the first step is to audit how you all work and what this means for your culture. So look at your values, look at the language you use to talk about your work, how you recognize and reward staff's work and achievements, and your own behavior. What messages are you sending? And to do this, it's really important to talk to your team, and the organization more broadly, and ask them, what does it feel like to work here? What are the unwritten expectations? What happens if someone doesn't go the extra mile? And you might be surprised, by the gap between what you believe your culture to be and what your team is experiencing. Um, but it's important to consider that if you don't have a healthy culture, you might not get an honest response to this question. And if your leadership team can't be honest, it's likely that the rest of the organization can't say how they feel either. The second thing to do to change this sort of culture is to challenge presenteeism. And this means more than having a wellbeing policy. It means noticing and naming the overwork when you see it. It means being explicit that you don't expect people to be available outside of working hours, and then modeling that yourself. It means looking at whether objectives and job roles are realistic. Are you setting your organization up to fail by asking people to do more than is possible? Um, a sustainable charity makes a bigger difference than a burnt out one. The third step is to invest in well-being that goes deeper than training. Resilience workshops and employee assistance programs have their place. They are really important things. But if the culture that sits beneath those still expects people to give everything, those interventions are only going to scratch the surface. Real well-being investment means developing psychological flexibility in your team so they can manage stress, so they can stop firefighting, so they can problem solve, and so they can switch off at the end of the day. And then building a culture and ways of working that actually support those skills. Because the thing is, there's no point telling staff to take breaks or prioritize their well-being if the workload and culture make that impossible. The training and the culture have to work together. It's not an either or situation. The fourth step is that you have to get every leader on board, not just the senior team. Culture change doesn't happen from the top down. Every manager, every team leader, every person who sets expectations for others needs to understand and model the shift. That means leadership development that goes beyond skills and techniques, that addresses the beliefs and behaviors that sustain an unhealthy culture at every level. Because if your leadership team are on board, but you have a service manager who's perhaps still sending emails at 9 p.m. and praising people for staying late, the message from the top won't be heard. And you'll find yourself in a situation where your senior leadership team really believes in the values, but the team, the teams across the organization believe they mean something very different. And so we have to make sure this is joined up throughout the whole organization. So ultimately, your charity's culture is either asking your people to live to work or work to live. And the uncomfortable truth is that for many charity cultures, however well intentioned, we're asking for more than is sustainable. And as a result, they're making it harder to meet their charitable aims. The end of the day, a burnt out team, burnt out organization can't have an impact that an organization that's really thought about its culture and really thought about how it supports its staff does. And so this doesn't have to be an inevitability that we have burnt out organizations, but changing it requires someone to name it, to honestly review the culture and ask the difficult questions, and finally decide to do something differently. And that can be you. And if you're curious how I can help you, do get in touch. I'm happy to have a chat. So that's it for today. If today's episode resonated, please make sure you like, subscribe, and share this. And I'll see you next week. Bye for now.